Welcome everybody to another episode of Text and Plugs and Rock and Roll. You guys know me, I'm Adam. I have with me a coworker. So for many of these episodes, I'm trying to reach out to other people in the community that I've worked with in my past or that I've gone to school with or folks that I know from outside of Red Hat. But this is actually the first episode that I've recorded with somebody that I work with today. So I have with me Paul Frields. So Paul, go ahead and introduce yourself, let the audience know how we know each other, and then maybe go into a little bit of background about your work at Red Hat, how you've gotten to where you go. So
Yeah,
I'll leave it up to you. Have fun.
certainly. Yeah. So my name is Paul Frields. I'm a director of software engineering at Red Hat, and that's how I know Adam. We've kind of corresponded a few times, and we've got some great cultural dimensions, I guess, at Red Hat that include, because we try and bring our full selves to work. We've got some shared channels where we've got a lot of music makers that sort of hang out together during the day, and we talk about the things that turn us on in our musical lives outside work. I've been at Red Hat for 16 years as of this February we just passed. And I started there as kind of a community project lead in the open source community. But I went on to work on product after that, and then later went on to manage one of the engineering teams that worked in the community area, and then that's kind of expanded over time to the point now where I've got a group called Platform Foundations that covers basically a lot of foundational technologies and enabling technologies from the upstream open source community all the way through to our core kernel groups and our core libraries and tools that go into our enterprise product, Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
Yeah. So for those of you who didn't understand anything that Paul just said, he's in charge of the important stuff at Red Hat. So there are technologies that are just sort of pie in the sky, and then there are technologies that actually matter that sit underneath everything. And Paul's in charge of all the stuff that actually matters. So his job is very, very important. I have great respect for Paul and for the teams that work under him. No joke. I mean, I work on the Ansible side now, but in the past I had worked with RHEL, I'd worked with OpenShift, and worked with things that were even more core to the Linux experience. And Paul's teams are where it's at. They're doing great work. So thank you, Paul.
Yeah,
What was life like before Red Hat?
right.
Yeah, yeah. What was life like before Red Hat? I don't even know. Did you?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. So and I'm sorry, there's a bit of a lag here, so I'm sorry if I ended up skipping
it's
over
fine.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so before I came to Red Hat, I had almost 18 years, or about 18 years, that I worked for the federal government. I did a few different kinds of jobs there that were, technical in nature. I started as kind of an analyst doing like planning and budget and operations and things like that. And then later, I was a forensic examiner and working, basically doing analysis of computer media. And this is back in the days when that was still just a very fledgling kind of science and a
Mhm.
fledgling practice. And a lot, we established actually quite a lot of the operating procedures that they were new and kind of revolutionary in those days, but they're kind of the way a lot of people operate nowadays. There are whole commercial enterprises that have spun up to do forensic analysis and media analysis for commercial customers or for government customers or whoever. So it was really cool being in kind of the forefront. And that's actually one of the ways I ended up working for Red Hat. So I did that sort of thing, and also some kind of technical field operations as well. And a lot of it was, a lot of it was work that was, using open source code, using open source products, putting those to work in the field for specialists and things like that. So we would be kind of writing some of the things that they would use, or coming up with integrations and solutions that they would use. And all throughout that time, I've been a musician. I've been a musician since I was a kid, since starting in middle school, in the chorus and then in the band. And then, all through my time as a professional, I was doing something musical on the side, for all of those years in one fashion or another. And that's continued, through to today.
Yeah, that's very cool. And did you have a degree in computer science or mathematics or what? I don't know what the landscape was like back then because I know you went to UVA, but they didn't have a computer science program until like the 90s.
Yeah.
So
It was
what
it
was your
was
major?
long. I thankfully, there was a CS program when I was there, but
Uh,
it was definitely not what I think you would call competitive. So the University of Virginia, where, as you mentioned, that's where I went.
mhm,
The CS program that they had, they were teaching things that I feel like they were already on their way out. Uh,
mhm,
time I was a student. So I graduated from there with a bachelor's in 1991. Their computer science program consisted of things like they were teaching Fortran and Pascal and things like that
mhm,
still. Even when like C and C++ were kind of all the rage.
mhm,
And I did kind of take some CS courses here and there, but that was not my degree. My degree was in political science, or what they call it was U.S. government, or
mhm.
government studies. That was my bachelor's degree, but basically it was poli sci. And to be honest, I try to be honest all the time, but to be
Mhm.
candid, I took that degree because it meant I wasn't going to have to write a senior thesis, and so I had a lot of time to take other things that I thought were complementary and kind of would help me be a well-rounded individual. So I took some classes in music. I took some classes in like cinema and jazz as art
Mhm.
forms, or astronomy, or whatever floated my boat, history, things like that. So I was a liberal arts major, and that
Mhm.
definitely puts me, I think, out of step with the average engineering manager at Red Hat, where I am now. It's not to say we don't have any liberal arts majors or anything like that, but it's
Mhm.
not. I think by and large, that's not the story for most
More
people.
on the sales side, like where I am in pre-sales, we actually have quite a number of people. And interesting, like I would say some of the more successful ones
Mhm.
in pre-sales, like even in sales engineering, are ones that have some sort of liberal arts background.
Yeah, kids, don't let anybody tell you that a liberal arts degree is no good. Like it totally. From
Mhm.
my standpoint, like some of the like big thinkers, well-rounded, kind of the folks who can be really resilient and sort of go with the flow and find solutions. I feel like you can find that very easily with people who come out of that
Mhm.
background, just as much as people who are great solutions builders who are
Mhm.
engineers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there is some commonality to many creative fields and technology in that the best people are the ones that can focus for long periods of time and
Yeah,
that can focus on a specific problem rather than just sort of managing things 10 or 20 minutes at a time.
yeah, yeah,
Do you know what I
absolutely,
mean?
absolutely. Yeah, so that was kind of my school, I guess my
Mhm,
background school days. And I was doing music. While at college, I had a band. My last couple of years there, I would wasn't very successful. Didn't
mhm,
go anywhere, but it was a great way to
mhm,
kind of learn what it means to be in a band, how people work together, the personalities and so forth, and just trying to learn some very basic applications of like, not just playing the instrument, but how does the ensemble work together? How do I use this like gizmo that I got to
mhm,
put my bass guitar into? But also on the side of that, I was doing pit orchestra for a couple different musical theater companies. So there was one for the first year players, which was all the freshmen.
mhm.
UVA, they couldn't be in like the upper class,
Right.
more professional theater groups.
Mhm,
This was a way for them to cut their teeth. And so I was in the pit orchestra for that for, almost the entire time I was at university.
mhm,
Uh, there was another theater group I was worked in as well that did a couple musicals, and um, I loved that. And it was also a way that I could apply my skills because I could read music. I come up reading music. Had a great high school band director, who was he was like your typical, I think, person who pushes you maybe further than
mhm,
go, but that's the person that you always learn from. Like that's where you get your best life lessons, is those
Mhm.
challenges. And I love my band director, and thankfully, thanks to the work that he had done, I really came out kind of knowing how to put those skills to use in those situations. It was a lot of fun.
Nice. Did you grow up in Virginia?
I did for most of my life.
Mhm.
When I was when I was a tiny baby, can't remember
Yeah.
any of this. Moved around a bit. 'Cause
Mhm.
my dad was an FBI agent, but we settled in Maryland when I was two and a half. But then we moved to
Mhm.
Virginia when I was 9. So I
Cool.
have some memories of my living in Maryland, but almost all my life that like matters, like the formative part. It's all
Mhm.
about Virginia. I still live in Virginia now. In fact,
Mhm.
not far from where I grew up. Like my wife and I, we've moved around different parts of Virginia, but we
Mhm.
settled here. I'm sorry to say this, but literally over a quarter century ago, and yeah, we've been in the same house since then.
Yeah, and Virginia just in general, because that's where I grew up, right? I feel like the music scene and just sort of the academic opportunities are very unique. They're very distinct. I mean, we've talked about this before, like the fact that all the Chapman Stick players that I know are all, former students of Greg Howard, right?
Yeah,
And there's this very like world music kind of centric scene that doesn't seem to exist anywhere else. Like you think about bands like Everything and Dave Matthews Band, players like John Dirth, like
yeah,
a lot of those guys have this very like world music focus,
yeah. Very
even if they apply it outside of world music. And I don't see that in many other places.
yeah. It's very eclectic. I think very like um I call it like jazz adjacent. Maybe is a
Hmm.
good way to think of
Yeah,
it. Like very
that's a
close.
great term for it. It's a
Yeah,
great term for it.
and and at the same time, I think there's sort of this there's this sort of contiguous slide into like the DC scene as well.
Hmm.
Um, I don't live that close to what would have been considered like historically the Northern Virginia area, which really
Hmm.
bleeds into the DC scene quite a bit.
Yep.
I know a lot of people who are really active around the area. There is definitely a lot going on. Some really good songwriters around this area. I've been lucky enough to work, with a few times with people like John Carroll, and who am I thinking of? Sorry, the name is escaping me. There are some folks I've worked with around here. Where there's a studio in my area that does a lot of recording. Oh my gosh, I can't believe the name is. This is what happens when you get old, folks.
Yeah, it's all good.
It's the alternative, but this is what you get. I'm thinking of like Keller Williams, his touring band. I know
Hmm.
some of the folks that are in that group. Um, and yeah, it's been really interesting kind of putting roots down in this area where I am, because I think a lot more of it is more about folk and bluegrass. I think down in my area of
Hmm.
Virginia, it starts to really become more like that. And there are definitely some incredibly talented folks down in this area. The Starling family comes to mind, and just there's some great talent down here. And also I would say in Fredericksburg, where I live, yeah, there's also a decent amount of the scene is still, it's kind of like blues and southern rock and both kinds of
Yeah,
music here.
yeah,
So
you can't avoid that anywhere in
yeah,
the South, but especially, I mean, in Virginia, it's obvious, right? It's
yeah, yeah,
but it is interesting that the mountain range, like the Blue Ridge Mountain Range, definitely divides Virginia culturally
yeah,
in a lot of ways. And I would say, well, I grew up in Harrisonburg, so it was essentially like the micro Charlottesville in a lot of ways, because a lot of kids that wanted to get into UVA and couldn't ended up at JMU. So a lot of Harrisonburg scene very specifically
yeah,
was essentially Charlottesville, just sort
yeah.
of copied. But the
JMU
rest,
are like
yeah.
as a music school. JMU,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
that was the place to be. I mean, honestly, that's the I did some I did take some classes and do some things with the UVA music department, and
Hmm.
it definitely leaned way towards the theoretical side. I mean, of course, you had some great players like
Hmm.
John Dirth was there, for example. I think he's a great
Hmm.
example. Just, I mean,
Yeah.
amazing player. There were some great
Oh yeah.
players, but the department kind of leaned really theoretical, and it feels to me like JMU, yes, great music department, and they have all that, but also very like they take the practical side also
Hmm.
very seriously, and a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, and they have a killer marching band program. Always
Oh,
have.
yeah,
I did
marching bands.
drum
Ooh,
major. yeah, I did drum major camp at JMU for my senior year. They let me lead people, which is interesting. But but yeah, but like I mean, and that camp was very well regarded, and just that whole program, that marching band program, has always been
Yeah.
very well regarded. So I always felt like Harrisonburg was kind of its own little island in
Right.
Western Virginia, but the rest of the state very much culturally more like that blues and southern rock thing. Huge, huge. I went to school at Roanoke College, so down the road, like in Salem, so about 2 hours from Harrisonburg, but it felt like night and day. Like the
Yeah.
difference between hanging out in Harrisonburg and hearing JMU grads and people play and bands like Everything and
Right.
those kind of groups versus being in Salem and like every concert you go to is all 12 bar blues all the time and
Yeah.
nothing else. It was very, very different. And
Yeah.
that area is also where a lot of country music got started. So you see a lot of the like proto country, the kinds of things that today we would think about being like Mumford and Sons and Old Crow Medicine Show and groups like that. Who Old Crow, like half those guys are from Harrisonburg. Yeah. But that kind of scene back when I was a kid, that's where that happened. That wasn't really like, let's go all be hipsters and drink $10 coffees and go listen to Mumford and Sons. It was very much like, very different, more working class, more blue collar kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
but so Paul, you're a bass player. I'm a bass player. What do you have with you? What's in your room right now?
Oh, what do I have in the room with me? Okay, that's a.
Yeah.
I'm in the smallest room in my house right now,
Okay. Okay.
which is weird.
But there's a bass in that room,
Recording
I would
studio.
assume.
Yeah, I
Okay.
do. I've got. Well, I don't have to bring it on camera, but I've got a
Yeah.
the, you know, if
Mhm.
you're going to have one bass in the room that you're going to record
Mhm.
with, it's a Fender Precision flats, and it's got custom shop 1962 wound pickups in it. It's a newer body and neck, etc., but
Mhm.
it's like old style pickups in it, and it's the bee's knees for recording. So if I'm
You
going to lay
said
that apart, that's the thing.
you said pickups plural, so I'm assuming it's like a PJ setup.
Oh, sorry, no, I just mean the split. Sorry.
Okay. I was like, wait a minute, hold on. I've got a Made in Mexico jazz right behind me that just
Yeah,
kind of sits up here because I think the Rickenbacker, if I had it in here, I'm sure the child would destroy it.
yeah,
So my kids are real young,
yeah,
and they like to come in while I'm working and come play with things, and I wouldn't want them to be messing with something like really
yeah.
nice. So that stays downstairs. But
Yeah, my
um,
kids are they're kind of they're grown at this point. I've got
mhm,
one still here doing school and work, but I've got another one who she graduated school, moved out
mhm,
a year ago, and they were always very respectful. But I remember that age, like it was always
mhm,
like, "You get done, put it in the case
mhm,
because God forbid the accidents happen." I've got an arsenal of like there's a lot of instruments here. There is a lot
mhm.
of instruments in this house, like the I'm not going to run out of bases anytime soon.
That's
It's
good.
not
And
one
did
per
you,
kid,
yeah,
but
I mean, did you give your kids instruments like that? I'm assuming when you were younger or when they were younger,
I
you
mean, let them.
tried to
Yeah,
get them started.
yeah, absolutely. Like so for example, I have had I should say because I passed on.
Mhm.
I had a Fender, one of the Korean Fender Geddy Lee jazz basses. My daughter
Nice.
now has that. She
Mhm,
played on it in high school in jazz band.
mhm,
Um, I've got a couple sets of drums here. My son was the drummer in the family, or is. He's very good. A very good drummer. Took lessons from Toby Fairchild, who drums for Keller Williams and a bunch of other
mhm,
acts. Toby lives in this area, is a fantastic dude and and a
mhm,
great teacher too. Like takes it really seriously, but also is just a super super cool guy.
mhm,
And so so my son was kind of the drummer. We had piano around the house, not a real one because we didn't really have space for that, but a digital piano that I got early on when the
mhm,
kids took lessons. So yeah, definitely pass that on, and I've got them instruments. My daughter seemed like she was the person who more gravitated towards doing music. So my son
mhm,
actually went to chorus. That was his thing. He
mhm,
sang bass in the high school chorus. And my daughter, she was kind of the instrumentalist, so she did mallets and percussion, but she also could play beautiful piano, great
mhm.
voice, and play bass and stuff. And I always hoped that she would kind of like really kind of that the music bug would bite her, that she
Mhm.
would, be writing and composing and stuff. That hasn't, I guess it hasn't really happened yet, but it was something I never leaned too far into because I didn't want it to be like uncool. Like, oh, if dad wants this, I'm definitely not going to do that. Like,
Right, exactly.
I didn't want that to happen. So we'll see. The idea of like doing it for like on my own, like not
Mhm.
in an ensemble, just as a player of a large orchestra or something like that.
Mhm.
The bug to do that stuff didn't really hit me until I was in my 20s when I really started
Mhm.
doing, bands and recording and stuff.
Yeah. So you were in a band in college, right? What kind of music was it? Was it like
Uh,
rock? Was it jazz combo? Like what
it was
stuff were you playing?
it was basically it was what I consider now to be like it's the band that everybody should have, and it's also the band that you should never still be doing by the time you're serious, which is it's eclectic, man. Like, it was like a little something for everyone. And it's like,
Mhm.
that is really, with very few exceptions, not a great idea for a band professionally. So,
Mhm.
we played at fraternity parties and things like that, but it was like, it spanned the whole gamut. We were playing Pixies, and we were playing Depeche Mode. We were playing
Mhm.
B-52s. We were playing Delight. We were playing Parliament, Funkadelic. We were playing Rush. It was like it was the worst like amalgamation of all this. And I'm sure we were not
Mhm.
good because, a lot of us, like, we were decent players, but as a band, it's not the same thing. Right.
Right. And it's a great way to cut your teeth and get skills, but it's not a great way to actually like progress as a musician.
Yeah,
That
but it
makes
was
sense.
it was
Yeah.
fun. I don't regret it. I mean, I don't regret
Mhm.
it all. I look back on it super fondly, and it was a lot of fun. And you also learn about like the drama of being in a band when everybody is like different, you know,
Mhm.
different personalities. That how does that mesh together, and how do you
Mhm.
portray that on stage? And learning all that was fun too. We were called the Chronics, and that should like tell you right away, like what a. I mean, come on,
Well,
what were we
yeah.
thinking?
Right. I don't even want to tell you the name of my college band. Actually, I will. I will. We'll put this on camera. So the band that I was in college, we were actually a band put together by a songwriter, and his name was Dave. And Dave today is a librarian in Homer, Alaska. And I think he still makes music. But
Yeah.
Dave was, I guess, he was kind of trying to be sort of like Alan Sherman,
Mhm.
like acoustic player, but really witty lyrics and although his own music, not like parodies where you take whatever. But Dave decided that he wanted to have like essentially a backup band.
Yeah.
So but the backup band, we were all like hard rock guys. So it was us trying to turn these parody song, like I guess not parody, but like these humorous comedic acoustic songs into like Radiohead or something.
Yeah.
So it worked really well, but people were just sort of in Roanoke, they were just sort of off put by this. Like, who are these people that are coming out here with a dude with acoustic guitar and suddenly being so loud that we have to tell them to turn their amps down? Like, we don't get it. Like, it just didn't make sense. But it was fun. It was a really great group to be in. We won a battle of the bands and won 10 hours worth of studio time. So we got to go do recording at a studio in Salem that's called Flat Five, and they're
Mm.
really a mastering house. They're really not like a huge studio. So obviously the recordings turned out like the recording part didn't turn out as well as we would hope with 10 hours worth of work for 4 tracks. It's like nothing. That's like
Yeah.
super fast breeze through, but the mastering itself was actually really great. So he made us sound really, really good despite the fact that we really rushed through the recording and it was, haphazard at best.
Yeah.
In fact, I still have the stickers. So the band was called Dave Bernard and Resurrected Sausage. So this was our little sausage guy. That's
I
the
love it.
sticker.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yep. And I actually have a pile of them. If you want me to send you like 20, I can.
Please.
Yeah. But that was and we like pressed our own CDs. We did,
Yeah.
shows around, we took it like relatively seriously. We have a live album, weirdly enough, but it was a good experience. And all of us knew that none of us were ever going to be like professional musicians.
Yeah.
The one guitarist guy actually is a professional trumpet player in New York City. Like
Yeah.
he was sort of like Flea, where he had the two instruments that he was primary at and had to make a choice, and he decided to go with trumpet instead of
Right.
guitar. So he plays in, I think he lives in like Long Island City and plays up in New York, and he's actually a professional musician. His wife's a vet. But the rest of us, we all kind of had other careers that we already knew we were going to end up in. So none of us really took it that seriously
Yeah.
after school. So.
Yeah. Yeah. After school, I think, there is definitely a big change because, if music is not going to be your whole, like if you haven't made the decision that that's the thing you're going to do by the
Mhm,
time you get out of school, like if you get out of school
mhm,
voluntarily, what I mean is like, if you leave it, clearly you've made your choice. If you decide to go the whole distance with school, uh, I found it's very few people haven't made the choice by then. But if you haven't done it like really quickly after you leave school, you typically know which way it's going to go. I
mhm,
think for a lot of people, and I felt the same way. Like
mhm,
it didn't seem for me like it was a feasible thing, and maybe it was because neither of my parents were like creative types. I was kind of the black sheep of the family in that way. That like there
mhm,
were no other musicians in my family. The closest person I know in in my family who was a musician was like my aunt who married in, right?
mhm.
And the
Yeah.
only other person I knew of was like my great granddad, I think, who he used to be able to pick up any instrument and play it. And so
Mhm,
my mom always told me that that might have been where, for me, that came from, which like, immediately just like getting and figuring it out and, just being able to like play things by ear and stuff. So,
mhm,
but regardless, it just didn't seem feasible to me. And so, after school, it was kind of like, well, I want to find something to do now that I've got, it's been 5 or 6 months.
mhm,
I've got my job is under my belt now. I know what I'm doing there. Maybe I should look at doing something on the
mhm,
side. And it was basically another, like, it was kind of a sort of a crummy garage band where I
mhm,
knew it was like, I'm not going to get challenges here, but it was something to do. And thankfully, it was only a few months. And I ended up getting kind of recruited for a band that had some mutual friends in that
mhm,
band, and they were looking for a bass player because their bass player was he was having a kid and some other stuff, and he just felt like he
mhm,
couldn't really do that. And that band was like they actually had aspirations to to do big things. At least a few of the people in the band did.
mhm.
Now I still didn't see that really as feasible, but I was definitely all in for like, look, I'm gonna if I've got to measure up and do what's needed in this band, I will do that. So
Yeah.
like, you know, put on the costume, like what the put on the gear that they want on stage, buy the right kind of instrument, put in the right kind of energy on stage, be able to play in a certain style. I was like, I'm in, and
Mhm,
it was very successful. That was a band that like, we never had an empty gig. It was like always packed, hugely popular around that area, the Northern Virginia area. And then a bunch of folks were like, hey, we're gonna actually move out to LA. And I was like, have fun. Not for me.
yeah.
You guys will totally do great. And they had some, I think they had some they kind of like had that scraping the bottom of the level kind of success where they had a song that got on MTV, was used in one of the TV soundtracks.
Mhm,
Uh, the guy who fronted that band was kind of the songwriter and mastermind. He actually he died about, gosh, it was about a decade ago now, I think.
mhm,
And great dude. He was definitely driven. If you can imagine like like the human equivalent of Johnny Bravo, that's literally looked like. I
Wow.
do not.
Yeah.
I know I can find pictures on the internet and send them to you. His name was Danny Blitz, and he was a wonderful human being. Also demanding as a band
Mhm.
leader. There was not a lot that got by him that was like second rate, and was a great way to learn. And I'll always be very grateful for that opportunity because it was formative.
Cool, cool. That's awesome. Um, I don't think any of my bands ever quite that popular, but yeah. And being a bass player in particular, I always feel like you have more flexibility and opportunity to go to other groups because stylistically I mean there are differences obviously in bass styles across different genres, but I feel like there's a little bit more liberty because you're kind of sitting at the bottom end to stretch yourself out into other genres, whereas a guitarist, there's a lot of skills that you have to learn in order to just blend in with one style, and it's
Yeah.
very difficult to switch.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I definitely think that's true. I simplify this a lot because I always joke to people like, how hard can it be? You only got to play one note at a time, you know. And it was, you know, not to be disparaging. I love playing bass, and of course there are plenty of players who are doing way more than that stuff. But
Hmm.
it's hard. I guess the thing is, I don't know. I always try and keep an even keel about it, right, and
Hmm.
never get a big head, which I think is just good in life in general, and especially
Yeah.
can apply to a band
Hmm.
situation. And a
Yeah.
lot of the bass players I know seem to be like pretty grounded in that way, which I think I don't know. Maybe it like there may be some maybe there's some truth to like how the instruments different roles in a band attract different personalities, and I feel like that's one that
Hmm.
if you're comfortable being a sideman, like you're comfortable not living in the limelight, and you're comfortable just sort of holding it down, like
Hmm.
there's endless opportunities for that when you're a bass player, right? And I really enjoy that about the instrument. I enjoy that about the role. And yeah, I think that's kind of come out in the things that I've done, whether with that group or working with various singer songwriters, things like that. Like that's where I really get off on creating something that is somebody has a vision for it, and I'm there to kind of help fulfill what that is. And
Yeah.
figuring that out is a great process. I love that process. Hopefully it's something cool, something original, but also is like true to what they want, right? And like that for me as a sideman, I think is super fulfilling.
But you also do music on your own as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, I do some music myself too, and so sometimes if I'm that person, like
Hmm.
it'll be my vision or whatever. But and I do a lot of things nowadays that are I might not even be playing bass at all. Like I got really into synthesizers during COVID. Like
Hmm.
I never learned like what is a VCA, what is an LFO, blah blah blah.
Hmm.
All those things were
Yeah.
just like three-letter acronyms, and I understood none of them for many years because a lot of the bands I was in, they were rock bands, no synthesizers,
Hmm.
or they had a keyboard player, had one of those like it was a cover band that had guy had a digital unit that made a bunch of sounds, whatever. All good stuff, but that wasn't an opportunity for me to learn. But when COVID happened, I was like, man, I've always wanted to understand this, and thank God for YouTube. I can't. It's unfathomable to me that like how much we missed at my age, like growing up when
Hmm.
you didn't have any of those resources. And I think it's like the fact that kids coming up nowadays and younger bands, like they've come up in that age where there's so much information out there that you can easily get your hands on, and people demonstrate it to you live, and
Hmm.
easy to go from concept to practice. And I finally it's like having like the 2-watt light bulb that was like, "Beep," like went on
Hmm.
like, this tiny little bzz, bzz, over my head. I was like, I could probably go learn this. And so I did. I pulled out like a soft synthesizer, instrument that I had on my computer and just watched some YouTube channels. I'm like, oh my God, this is how this works. And I just got really deep into that and started doing sound design and making like different kinds of synth music. And that was sort of how I stayed sane over the year and a half or whatever, that like gigs were really hard to come by. Nobody was really doing much live stuff, and I was not in a I was not in a place where I felt like I wasn't driven to write songs right then. Like
Hmm.
I wasn't in that place. And this gave me something to do. And I really started becoming, I think, more of a sound designer and composer and that sort of stuff. Like that's somewhere where I always felt very comfortable from having this, just the education
Hmm.
and like a classical background. And it really gave me a place to put all that. And I came out of that with sort of a whole bunch of mishmash of creations. I made I finished last year. I finished an album of synth music. First time I ever put out like a whole album at one time, and it was like uh, it's just such a liberating experience that I definitely
Hmm.
want to repeat. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool that you got into that. And I think it makes sense as a bass player and as a classical musician because you are used to creating music in context with others. Like there are a lot of people that I know that would struggle with that. My brother's a great example of that. His musical experience is almost entirely solo piano. So
Mhm.
trying to get him involved in something collaborative, he always has piano player's disease. He struggles with keeping in time. He will look at something as his vision and not like the vision of the whole group.
Yeah.
And he just oftentimes struggles when he ends up in these musical situations. Whereas somebody like me, like almost everything that I've done has been in a group context, whether it's been being in a jazz chorus or a rock band or whatever. Like I've been doing these things as a member in a larger context. And so I feel
Yeah.
like I have maybe a little bit more of that mentality. I've never gone down the rabbit hole of, doing like sound design per se. I've messed around with software synthesizers a ton, just trying to understand how it all works and fitting it together almost like a software problem, right? Like taking the different pieces and sort of putting them together and seeing what different problems each tool solves, and then
Yeah.
seeing how you can put those together. That's how I came to it and thought about it. Probably because I happen to have been playing with software synthesizers roughly the same time I was taking CS classes. So
Ah,
even though I was a music major, I actually started off as a double major in college, and then decided to drop the CS because I was like, I'm not going to go back to school to get a music degree. Like nobody does that. But plenty of people go back to school to get a science degree or a computer engineering. So I actually went back for computer engineering first, and then realized that it was going to take me forever, because I was going to an actual school that wanted me to show up all the time, and I was working at Intel full time. So I was like, I
right.
can't do this. And secondly, the Oregon State came out with a second degree program that made it really easy to get a CS degree. So I just jumped schools and went and did that.
Yeah.
But I've always, I guess it depends on what time of my life I was in as to whether I was exposed to computer concepts, or not. But some things that I've learned over time with music, I feel like I've picked up certain ways of thinking about the problem because I was forced to do so in other aspects of my life, like in writing software or in, you know, taking a RAM chip and going and, trying to write to different registers, like having to come up with ways to break down the problem into smaller pieces.
Right.
Oftentimes in music, that is something that we have to do in orchestration and whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And certainly like when you're, anytime that you're trying to learn a piece or, if you're, it happens in, I think
mhm,
it happens in composing and sound design too, where you can, there's elements that have come together and there are elements
mhm,
that aren't coming together, and trying to figure out like what's going to work here properly is,
mhm,
that's kind of where you invest a lot of the time. Like, oh, great, maybe you got your theme or your motif
mhm,
together. And that was like, great, that's 75% of the problem solved. But then the 25% that takes the
mhm.
75% of the work
Yeah.
is most of it.
Yeah. So, for any of your music groups, were you ever the band leader, or have you just mostly joined other groups? I would assume you probably have at some point, right?
Yeah, I've done band. I mean, I have a band now. It's
Hmm.
it's a cover band, but kind of like an event band. So we
Hmm.
do like a lot of weddings and corporate things like that.
Cool.
And I am the band leader for that because I think just ended up de facto that way because I was like, I think I'm probably more organized than some of the people in the group, which that is like that is such a frightening
Hmm.
thing to say based on like how disorganized a person I always felt myself to be
Hmm.
for many years. And I feel like my professional career has kind of demanded me to grow in that area.
Hmm.
Now I go back and turn it around and I apply that in my, off work life. I can apply those skills, like skills I've learned as a manager for like how to have a conversation with somebody that's really tough, right? Where
Hmm.
you need to relate something to them, but you want to do it without only for the purposes of helping them and making them better, not to make them upset or send them away. You want to honor them and respect them, coaching, things like that, kind of looking at like, what can we do as a team? How can we solve this problem? Like how can people be put to use in like their best capacity to do this or that? Those kind of things have really come together. And, I think with some of the organizational skills and the fact that like, okay, I'm good with technology, maybe not as good as some of the people I work with, maybe not as good as most of the people I work with. When you compare me to like the average human being, I'm really good with technology. And so I can apply those things to the band situation, the business side, making sure the taxes are filed on time, everybody gets their statements, liaising with venue owners or a client.
Hmm.
Those are things that I'm trying to spread out nowadays and like bring more of the team members in to do that. But then that also is like imparting the experience to them, like helping coach them on here's your objective, here's some of the things you want to keep in mind as you talk through this with them, right? And getting them to a place where they're comfortable with that. So that's nowadays more kind of the thing that I'm bringing in more and more. But yeah, with this anyway, not to walk too far afield, but I'm still leading this particular band, and so I end up kind
Hmm.
of doing the managing and the sound and stuff like that for that group.
Cool. So, because usually when I'm talking to people about their relationship with their tech career versus music, it's these are the things that I learned as a musician that have translated to skills that I have in technology that have helped advance my career. And it seems like you have the opposite approach, where it's I actually build those skills in my tech career, and then I'm applying those things back to the music that I'm doing today. So it's
Yeah,
interesting, and I mean, it definitely works either way, for
totally,
sure.
totally. Yeah, 100%. And there's definitely some things from I think things from music. Something I think that's just fundamental in music is, now, of course, you could be a great solo artist and be amazing, and there are lessons you bring in from that, like the value of practice, right? The value of sticking to it, right? Going through challenges. There's any number of pursuits that's like kind of universal too. And being a soloist, I think you can bring those same things in together. Just like achievement in any area will bring the same lessons, and you can apply that to your whole life. Music, I think, is it's probably music and sports are probably the two areas where when you're trying to do something, like you have a goal, that goal is not achievable just because everybody showed up. That, yes, showing up is half the battle, but the other half of the battle is really hard too, right? Like, how do you win that game? Or if you're in a band, how do you carry off this performance in a way that inspires people, that makes them happy, gets them up out of their chair where they could just as comfortably sit if they felt like it. Um, you're trying to achieve that, and it takes the whole team agreeing on how are we going to pursue that? How do we want to work together to make this performance great? And maybe I should maybe back up, not to say music is special that way, but I guess the arts and
Hmm.
sports, I guess, really are kind of, I think, special in that way. And so that is a lesson of like the value of the team is definitely something I brought into I feel like I brought that into my career, but the career has given so much back that I've used now in the band.
Yeah, and just curious, how did you decide to go down that path of becoming a manager and becoming a director versus just living in individual contributor land? Do you think that the fact that you had this experience with music and being forced in those situations helped you feel comfortable to make that move?
That's a great question. I actually think it was kind of I felt it wasn't really like the skill part bringing in. It was actually kind of the opposite. Like, I felt so overwhelmed by the technical expertise that other people had around me.
Mhm.
Red Hat was like extremely daunting. And I was like, well, there's two ways I could go about this. Like, I could either, so thinking back, I'm resetting my timeline here.
Mhm.
Thinking back to those days when I kind of made that change, I had put a lot of time and energy into Red Hat, probably more than was healthy. Like, I was doing very, very long days in a way that was probably like, it wasn't probably, it was definitely like impacting my family, my marriage,
Mhm.
things like that. I definitely achieved a lot, and I felt like I learned a lot, but I was still so far behind all of these technical practitioners. And every day there's more to learn. There's more to do. Like, the world is changing at an accelerating rate around us. It's true, just as true today as it was when I, became a manager over 10 years ago. And I just felt like I could go one of two ways. Either I could grind myself into oblivion and try to learn as much as I can to like transition into being less of a like an operational person or a community lead person, and become more of a technical individual, so I can
Mhm.
be more of a fully empowered engineer. or I could change the game. And I kind of went for the latter. I thought, I
Hmm.
actually got looking around me, there are many amazing technical people, but I also hear from my leaders, my managers, the skills that I have that I bring to the table that are non-technical and that they say they depend on me for they can't get from other people in the team. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean into that. What can I do that can put those skills more to use? And so for me, that was managing. I could actually help other people. I could empower them. I could bring them together as a team. I could coach people. I could solve problems that are more social than technical, right? And those were the things that I decided to do. So that's how I got on the track of being a manager. I think was just understanding like my limitations here exceed my available time and
Hmm.
energy to surmount. And so you have to know, I think you got to pick your battles. And that was where I definitely picked a battle. I'm like, that is not a battle I can win, but I can win if the game that I play is instead about helping and empowering other people and sort of helping the people around me be the best that they can be.
Yeah. I think it's definitely easy to get technically exhausted. I feel like that, especially with AI, like just that whole, the fact that now there's this whole body of technical knowledge that is adjacent to,
Yeah.
kind of lives on the side of everything that we know.
Yeah.
But the good news is that I feel like AI these days, um, because I don't know how to describe this, but it's essentially architected in the same way that software is architected, but all the AI practitioners haven't quite seen it yet.
Yeah.
We have a lot of things that Red Hat in
There's
particular can
standardization.
offer to the table that's like, we solved these problems 20 years ago. You're
Yeah.
just coming up with new names and new concepts for this, but this architecturally is the exact same thing that we figured out a long time ago. Just use this. And
Yeah.
people are just like, no, but this is new and exciting and we want to invent things. It's like, well, just use these principles. Just do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So
This may
there's a
be,
lot of that.
this may be a little low. This might be a little low level in terms of like the AI stack. And
Hmm.
I don't know if this is going to resonate for your listeners, but
Hmm.
there's a lot going on in the hardware race and
Hmm.
the kind of the enablement race around
Yeah.
AI. And I heard somebody describe this to me as like this is kind of this is the equivalent of like the Wild West days of like look at where graphics and graphics accelerators were back in like the 90s, the early 90s, and we had this like kind of crazy world where everybody's trying to outspeed each other in terms of the graphics they can provide. But it was hell if you were software developers because there were all these competing, architectures to work with. And
Hmm.
finally we got to a place where we had like, oh, there's OpenGL now and there's DirectX,
Hmm.
things like that.
Hmm.
And now we can actually differentiate ourselves, as game developers or whatever based on the strength of our story or the engine or whatever it is that we're doing on top of that stuff.
Hmm.
I feel like that's where we have an opportunity, I think, to do something as a standard, a bearer of standards, a purveyor of standards, and a company that's like we've tried to help, I think kind of smooth that path where
Hmm.
it's very easy. It's easy to move your workload footprints. It's easy to negotiate how are you going to deal with application development that's going
Hmm.
to work the same everywhere. Like those are the areas where we've done really well, and this feels like, hey, this is something we can and must do, right, to get to
Hmm.
a better place in the next 5 to 10 years. You know, kind of have that sort of level of, I don't know if I want to call it abstraction, but like mediation or
Hmm.
simplification that makes it easier for businesses to get what they want out of their AI investments.
Yeah. There's a reason you have a P base in your office
Yeah, yeah. It's
because it's the exact same thing. I know
it's
it sounds a
like
little
it's a
weird,
one
but
trick.
like
It's a one
for
trick
those of you
pony,
who
but it's
aren't
a
bass
really good trick.
players, yeah, yeah, for those of you in the audience that are not bass players, like a P bass is pretty much like the standard thing that you would go to when you're not sure what bass to play.
Yeah,
But there are lots of good reasons for it. One, it's really simple. You've got one pickup, so the tonal changes that you would make that with your fingers or maybe with a volume knob a single tone knob. It's very simple. So
yeah,
you're not overcomplicating things by having like a bunch of pickups and switches and options and stuff.
Yeah, it's like
This isn't a
bright.
big.
Yeah, it's like
Mhm,
it goes. You can have bright or mellow,
mhm,
and you can be loud or quiet, and that's about
mhm.
it. It's like
Yeah.
it's
Mhm,
the P bass is like it's a.
mhm,
I always tell people it's a one trick
mhm,
pony, but it's a
mhm.
really good trick.
Yeah, I say that about my Rickenbacker too, but it's a different trick, right? But the thing about a P bass is that like, its resonant frequencies are mostly on the low end, like which is why you would want a bass player. You don't, it doesn't get in the way of a lot of other instruments, and I feel like a lot of people kind of want to deny their role, like they want to be everything to everyone rather than being really good at the one thing that they want to do. I see a lot of that in the AI landscape. I see a lot of that in software development. I see a lot of that in music, like people sort of denying the fact that they've made this choice about what role they want to play. And I think the P base forces you into that role.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
okay, there are only certain things I can do. I can still be creative. I can still enjoy what I'm doing, but I know my role and I'm not afraid to say it. Like I'm the guy with the 63 reissue P base.
yeah,
That's me. That's where I fit,
yeah.
So I
It's
think
like
that that's,
you kind of pick a lane, like pick that lane and negotiate the curves in that lane really, really well, right? And that's I feel like that's better than trying to like you said, be all things to all people. Like for example, no, like as a bass player, I'm not somebody who is I'm not going to go out there and play like Victor Wooten or somebody who's like maybe their thing is they do a lot of tapping and and they're multi-timbral, or they're doing like they're counterparting their own lines on the one instrument, something like that. I understand it. I understand what they're doing, but that's not a place that I feel invested in. And so
yeah,
what I
yeah.
like is I really like, James Jamerson, Pino Palladino,
Mhm,
Marcus Miller, like people who like they're folks who are like Tony Levin as another one of my
mhm.
favorites. These folks, they know how to play for the song, and that's for
Right.
me the most important thing. Is not my part or what I'm getting out of the instrument in terms of my learning or enrichment. It's really about, is this doing what it needs for the song? Is that the vision for like what this song will be? How is it going to connect with somebody? How is it going to get them like to hear it and like just think, wow, that is a really well put together song. Like if they notice the bass part first, I'm like, I failed. Like that is a failure in my mind.
Yeah. And none of those players that you mentioned are folks that people would consider bad bass players. Like a lot of them, even within our community, are some of the best players that we've heard of.
They're incredibly
But they also know how to be
talented.
tasteful, and that's
Yeah.
once upon a time I had an issue of Bass Player magazine, and there was a page in it that was like different people that had been interviewed in the magazine and their favorite bass licks.
Yeah.
And there was one from Michael Manring that was all like 16th notes, and he was like, I used such and such tuning on my bass, but he's got the Zons that have the keys where you can like change the tuning in the
Oh,
middle of a riff
the
kind of
hyper
thing.
bass.
And that's like, yeah, the hyper bass, yeah, the zone hyper bass. And he was talking about how this riff was like, 16th notes or whatever. And then there was somebody else that was like, oh, James Jamerson is great. And they just was like, this is the riff from my girl. And then the next one was two blank measures, and it was Victor Wooten, and he said, sometimes this is the hardest riff to play.
Yeah.
And it was just like, that is like an encapsulation of everything I think about Victor Wooten in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Is that
Bass.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's like, that stuff I think has become, that sort of thinking has become such, like being able to practice more of that, as, especially as a, like, in the studio and as more of like a producer nowadays, and as and in that band leader concept of like what's going on in the rest of the band, not just what I'm doing, that has really become such a great bedrock to rest on as a musician for me, in like in composing, or if I'm producing something for somebody else in the studio, or if leading the band, we're like, hey, let's bring it back here because we're in this, like we just finished the first chorus of this thing that we're doing. Let's bring it back because now we're in the second verse and we need somewhere to go. We can't just keep going up the hill. Bring it back, bring it forward. Like we have to, there's got to be some, you want some dynamics in the song, and those things of like the concept of contrast, right? And just bringing in like a holistic sense of what people are doing. Like I feel that that can be, it's such a great principle to have if you are any part of a team, like knowing when to lean in and knowing when to lean out, whether it's at work or it's doing music or whatever your role is. I mean, you could be a drummer or a guitar player or a singer, and you could literally think about those same things. Like not just like how do I do this and that, but like maybe if you just did three of those five things,
Mhm.
and like it makes those three more impactful, right? And makes the whole of the experience more meaningful to somebody who's watching it from the outside.
Agreed. Agreed. Awesome. This has been an amazing conversation, Paul. I would expect nothing less from you, but I very much enjoyed this. And I've said this every time I've recorded one of these, but getting to talk to coworkers and people with a lot of experience and people that I know resonate with me because we play the same instruments and have a lot of things in common. This has been fantastic. So I want to thank you for taking an hour out of your Friday think time or whatever, however you divide up your week to come and chat because I think this is a really great way to sort of think about what you've done, think about who you are and where you want to go next, right? Like I having these conversations, that's every time I'm talking to somebody, I'm just like, there's all these new options in a career or in music that I'm thinking about and things that are suddenly opened up to me because I just dared to ask, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you. Where can people find you other than LinkedIn? Like what other means to find your music or conversations or
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah, oh yeah, thanks for the plug. Yeah, what do you have going on today? So there's a couple of places people can find me. I'm not hard to find online, but um my synth alter ego is called Stickster, Stickster. You can find me on Bandcamp and all, socials and all that sort of stuff. I also have a pretty well outfitted project studio at home where I will do like I lay down parts for people, contribute, whether it's like keys, guitar, bass, beats, whatever, is Fifth Dominion Studios, and that's fifth.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Paul, thanks so much. Have a great afternoon. And for everybody that is viewing this podcast, you have a great afternoon as well, or evening, or morning, or whenever you're listening to us. And we'll catch up again later. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for having me, Adam.
Yeah.